This story of innovation and change is sponsored by Invesco QQQ, the official ETF of the NCAA. I want you to tell us about the innovation that's coming to the college football playoff and how it's going to look.
You may have heard, but there's going to be a 12-team playoff next year. And I think coming out of this Florida State situation, a common thing we are hearing is that, it's going to be a lot easier for the committee now. They're not going to have this Florida State decision to make. I actually think it's going to be a lot tougher. I think it's going to be a lot harder because we're going to have a lot more things to debate, and there's going to be a lot more questions. We're still going to have a 12-person committee. They're going to be using the same criteria they've been doing now, but we're going to be debating a lot of different things. You just mentioned Florida State over Georgia at 5 versus 6. It doesn't matter this year. It doesn't matter for the 14 playoff. For the 12-team playoff, that's the difference between playing Liberty in your first game and playing Ole Miss in your first game. That's going to be a huge difference. We're going to be debating 5 versus 6. That's going to be hugely important. 8 versus 9, the last spot for home field. That's going to be really important. 10 versus 11, the last at-large spot. This year, that was Ole Miss and Oklahoma, which we didn't really talk about. The group of 5 spot, which we did talk about, which was Liberty getting in over SMU, a bit controversially. If you've ever paid attention to the committee's rankings outside of the top 4, they're quite inconsistent. And I ranted for a minute on this podcast a number of weeks ago when Iowa popped up at number 16 when they weren't even ranked in the poll. And I was dumbfounded by that decision, but it didn't really matter. Next year, that's going to matter. You're in at-large territory if you're 8-2 Iowa, who's not even ranked in the AP poll. So I think the committee's job is going to get harder, and it's going to get hard every single year. So as we look ahead toward the 12-team playoff and the things that are changing, I think we're going to be debating a lot more than we are now, because most years the top 4 is really easy. Next year, we're going to be scrutinizing a lot more decisions that the committee is making.
So one of the reasons that this is why I like the 12-team model is because there are different thresholds of where that debate will be. So the top 4 seeds have to be conference champions and they get buys. So that's going to matter, right? Winning your conference championship, earning a bye. That's a big deal. And then those next 4, as you mentioned, hosting games. That's a big deal. So you want to be in that 5 to 8 range. And then obviously for 9 to 12, getting into the playoff matters. And so you still have obviously the highest ranked group of 5 champion and things of that nature. So there's just still like a lot of thresholds and a lot of interesting debate. I do think if we're going to be arguing about the teams that are getting in, if so you're talking about like 12 versus 13, I think that's going to be at a different level in terms of like a different tenor of the argument. Like we argue about the bubble in the NCAA tournament, but those teams are all very flawed. And so like the teams that we're going to be debating about for that 12th spot, the 11th and 12th spot, or I guess the 12th spot will probably be the group of 5 champion most years. So let's say like seeds 9, 10, and 11. I do think those are going to be flawed resumes. Like those will be teams that probably have multiple losses, 2 or 3. They will have moments where it's like you could have taken care of business and not made this a question. So like I think that'll be a little bit different than arguing 4 versus 5. And this year was a unique example where there were more teams that deserved a chance to play out the national championship, like deserve to play for it and have their season end in a loss and not in a conference room. But I do think, again, I think the conversation will be a little bit different. And Chris, I think in general, we will be hopefully more informed about like what the selection committee is actually valuing because we will be paying attention deeper into the rankings. I'm a little surprised that the committee is not going to get bigger. I thought that they would possibly adjust the makeup of the selection committee as they expand the playoff. But by all accounts, and I've asked this multiple times, they're not doing that.
Yep, I checked again the other day, triple checking. They're not expanding the committee. Quick question. Do you know who the last team left out was this year? It was Oklahoma.
If we had had the 12-team
playoff.
Okay.
Yes, it was Oklahoma, who was also the last team left out of the New Year's Six this year. They beat Texas. They were 10-2 and beat Texas. They lost to Kansas and Oklahoma State. Number 11, the team that got in was Ole Miss, who beat LSU but got destroyed by Alabama and Georgia. You had Penn State, who lost at number 10, who lost to Michigan, Ohio State, and beat Iowa and that's it. Like they didn't really do much of anything. Should Oklahoma have gotten in over Penn State? I had this debate in my 133 rankings that I have to do every week. That was a very difficult decision, that 9 through 12 spot that I had to make. Saw a couple other people make. Most people, unless you're like an Oklahoma fan, you're whatever, but they're pretty upset that they didn't get a New Year's Six spot, and that's a debate we're going to have. And yes, it's a flawed team, but I don't think an Oklahoma or a Tennessee getting left out of the field is going to go over very quietly. So we're going to continue to have these debates as it expands.
And I'm not saying that, but I do think that some of my reaction to snubs in the NCAA tournament is that you had plenty of chances to take care of business and not make it a question. So I do think that will feel a little bit different, but you're totally right. I mean, it's not going to matter for the teams that we're debating, and more teams will be in the mix for those spots in that final weekend or in those final couple of weeks, because I guess not everyone will be playing in championship games, but that will be more up in the air probably, as well as we see like how those teams slide up and down or who participates in a championship game if you lose a conference championship. So like those moving pieces are going to make this very interesting. And I also think that we're going to have some uproar by the team that gets left out because the group of 5 champion is in. Like, I'm sure someone's going to complain about that as well. And, you know, SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey has already made different pushes about like the 8 best, that he would have supported an 18 playoff. It was 8 best and no AQs. I do think you will probably see the SEC, potentially the Big Ten as well, push to eliminate or decrease the amount of automatic qualifiers, because they're going to have a ton of teams that'll be in the mix. And, you know, if you look at how this all shook out this year, it was all future Big Ten or SEC teams except Florida State. So they're going to be supporting systems without automatic qualifiers because they're going to have a lot of at-large teams trying to get into this thing.
Yeah, and some of those others, like their group of 5, like Liberty got in as undefeated over 2-loss SMU, but Liberty had the worst schedule in the country. And there was a lot of debate about that. They got in to their spot. Florida State got left out of their spot being undefeated. What is the comparison there? What is the criteria when you're comparing them? 8 versus 9 is going to be a big one because 8 versus 9, whoever's 8 is going to host 9. So you want that home field. 2 years ago, that would have been Kansas State and Tennessee, which would have been a very contested debate. Kansas State won the Big 12. Tennessee beat Alabama. Like, that's a pretty big decision. So it'll be interesting to see how that goes. I really think we're going to have more committee drama every year now moving out, because there will be actual things to debate, because in the 4 team, for the most part, there really wasn't.